late in the process. You'll see behind me a chart. That chart is a variation of a mind map, you could say, that Michael Chekhov hand drew for Mala Powers, who was my teaching partner for 18 years. And she was the executor of Michael Chekhov's estate and privately coached by him. So that's a variation of that, and it is colored, it's contemporized to make it a little more exciting, but the entire chart is available on chekhov.net, and it has some interactivity, so you can click on a button and find out more about that. So you'll be able to find that on chekhov.net. And the reason I'm mentioning it is in sort of restructuring the chart, we placed psychological gesture right at the top. And in my opinion, it is the tool that unites all of the other tools. And when I think of it as the cherry on the Chekhov cake, I think of all the other tools as ingredients. And we learn in the Chekhov technique to work with the individual ingredients so that ultimately we can make as many different kinds of cake as we want. Or maybe we just want eggs, so we're just using one particular ingredient. To look at the concept of psychological gesture first, to say what is a psychological gesture we'll talk in multiple ways about what it is. The essence of the character in its thinking forces, in its feeling forces, in its will forces, and in its bodily shape and form, physical form, psychological form, spiritual form, in effect can be captured in one motion, one movement, and that it's kind of like a living logo. So if you think of the check mark of the Nike logo, in that one image, it captures the entire essence of Nike. And the gesture is kind of like that. The idea being that you can do this gesture in one breath, in one inhale and one exhale, and instantly trigger everything that you need in that particular moment. So before we go further, I'd like to invite everybody to get up on their feet and begin to move through the space, building upon Marjo-Riikka's suggestion that we can actually be kind to our bodies, say hello to them again, as we did. How are you, body? It's good to see you. And it is just to take a moment, what if we ask ourselves, what does our body mean to us? How much of your body is an actor's body? Is there some part that's not an actor's body? Look at the bottom of your feet, perhaps. Is that part of your actor's body? Is the small of your back part of your actor's body? Is your tushy? You know, it's pretty likely that all of our body is an actor's body. And so when we go to experience and explore the psychological gesture, one of the central guidelines is that the process will engage, guess how much of our body? 100% of the body. And of course, we want to engage a feeling of ease with that. And we also want to engage the concept that we can put effort together with ease, so that we are not in effect dancing. And to do that, I'd like to try a little improvisation. So if you will find someone else who's got a live video and perhaps go and pin them for a moment. Just pick someone who's got a live video and pin them. They don't need to know who it is, who's being pinned, so that you can see them. Okay, they don't know, you don't know, maybe it's me, maybe you've picked someone else. I'm going to do this with you, who's got a live video. And what I'd like you to imagine is that they are a character named Tinkerbell. So Tinkerbell, some of you may remember, was from Peter Pan, and Tinkerbell was this little fairy light. And at one point, Tinkerbell was starting to die, okay? And what I'd like you to imagine is this is a little improvisation. So you want to use your vocals with it. Imagine that you are literally trying to actually physically touch the person that you've pinned, and you can speak to them. So like, oh my God, please, what we want to do is we want to make sure that they know we care enough for them. So what do we have to do for Tinkerbell? We have to clap our hands, right? So check in. Can you see, is Tinkerbell's light fading? And let's just try that. Just imagine Tinkerbell's really bright. He's going to say, hi, Tinkerbell. You can speak. Hi, Tinkerbell. How are you? Uh-oh, Tinkerbell's starting to fade. Start improvising. Oh my God, Tink, try to convince Tinkerbell not to go away. Tinkerbell, please stay, please, don't go, don't go. No, please, don't go. Come on, Tink, please. I'll clap for you. I will. I'm clapping. Tinkerbell. She's coming back. Tinkerbell's coming back. Oh, yes, Tink. Oh, Tinkerbell's back. Yay. Oh, Tinkerbell's back. Woo. Okay, great, guys. Great. So, question for us to reflect on: how much of your body held the urge to reach for Tink, to get Tink, to support Tink, to inspire Tink to stay with us? How much of your body was involved? Can you feel it now in the bottom of your feet? Can you feel that urge was there? And was there any part of you where that urge was not there? The urge to save Tinkerbell. There was a quality. What was the quality that you were using? Perhaps mine was urgency. Perhaps mine went from urgency to despair. And I was doing a lot of reaching and I'd say pulling or gathering. What were you doing? So you can think about that. What was the basic action that you were physically doing? And it could have been absolutely different from mine, which is perfect because we're all creative individuals. As we reflect on that, we can say that there was a definite quality, and that quality perhaps changed. And the change occurred perhaps when Tink was fading further and further away. Maybe your tempo got faster. Maybe your worry and concern heightened. And maybe when Tinkerbell actually came back, your quality changed and your gesture changed. And what did it become? Some kind of opening, some kind of uplift. When you were winning, when your urge was being met, your urge to save Tinkerbell was being met, it created a different emotional quality because you were winning. And that was distinct from the time when you were losing, when you were failing when Tink was dying. where the urge to save may have been at its strongest point. So what we're looking at here is to understand that inside of us, invisible in us, is the radiating, surging power of desires. The wish, the urge to do things. And interestingly enough, in Lisa Dalton, my urges may be very different than what my character's urge is. And the task of that psychological gesture is to transform me, my body, and my thinking, and my feelings, and my will force into the characters so that I can experience through my whole being this urge. If we ask ourselves for a moment to simply stand and allow that entire force field of desires to move through us, maybe we allow it to do micro movements with us. In the energy field, in the etheric forces, in our imagination, we're still perhaps, if we do that moment when things really going, we feel this in every part of our body. We feel it down in the groin. We feel it in our feet. We reach. But now, when we begin to lessen the physical expression, our task becomes to be able to radiate, send out, and or draw in the images and let them be what Mr. Chekhov calls intangible powers that have a tangible dynamic. That process of decreasing the amount that the world sees, and let's say today we're looking at on camera, the amount that the camera actually sees, when that is softened, lessened, or decreased, Mr. Chekhov called that veiling. And that veiling is like taking a piece of sheer fabric, a veil, and keeping the power behind it very strong, but letting only the amount you want seep through that fabric. So the fabric is blocking the light, and you decide how much seeps through. The power remains intense, and that's why you could have some of those beautiful moments that Elise had, where in her imagination, she was still piercing, or she was still reaching, and you could still feel the tenderness, or you could feel the fire without her doing large physical actions. So when we look at what is the psychological gesture, on one hand, the gesture is an invisible concept. And on the other, we can say there is a way to completely physically express the gesture. So I'd like to share with you a gesture, and I'd like you to imitate this gesture and see what perhaps awakens. And when we do this, I would like you to, we'll come back and we'll unmute and we'll talk for a few minutes about what you get out of this gesture. Okay, so here it is. I'm going to actually lower the camera so that you can see more of the body there, and the legs in particular, to try to see that. I'm turning a little bit for this. So that's the gesture. The gesture gesture has a big inhale. It presses down through the heel of the hands, past the body, peeling down the body as the leg turns in, knees contracting, pushing down the body, and the shoulder coming to the ear, pushing out and away past the groin. So we'll do that 2 more times. And after that next time, just try and sense into what does it awaken in me. Ready? Fly back over yourself. What does it awaken for you? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to share.
Adjective.
Excellent.
Shame.
Yes. What else?
Vulnerability.
Vulnerability. Yes. Excellent.
Pain.
Anger and fight.
Anger and fight. Excellent. Who else?
Fear.
Fear.
Push off something.
Good, good. What other images, thoughts? I'm sorry?
Childlike.
Childlike.
Power.
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 Sadness.
Sadness.
For me, it was kind of like a loss of power.
Loss of power. Good. We can feel your creative individuality. It's beautiful.
Aversion.
Aversion. Yes. Yes. Very good. We see on the chat fear, protectiveness. Yes. Very.
Hiding something, concealing.
Yes. Yes. Is it reverberating in you currently?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're going to stay with that for just a moment, and you can leave your I don't care about the noise that might come through. You can let your mic stay on for a moment, and you don't even have to look at the camera, but just imagine that someone that you were living in this. It's living, it's repeating in you, and someone is handing you a cup of coffee. Just imagine someone hands you a cup of coffee. And if you want to, if you have a beverage, you can take it and work with it if you want. And suppose our director suggests that took too long to do. You need to do that moment again. Repeat that moment. Can you cut it in half? And can you maintain the influence and inspiration the gestures brought for you? You can reimagine it, or you can be still living in the sustaining of it. And now, let's step away, step up again. Peel that off, please. Peel that off.
Peel it off, Mom.
Pack it up. Send it back up to that sphere of imagination where it lives in the higher art field, and it's always available if we need it, but it's clear. Get rid of it. Express, exhale. Make sure it's clear from every part of your body. Okay. And speak it if you have to. Blah, blah, blah. use sound, you can clap it away. Clear that away. So I'm going to show you what that was from. I realize that there's some flare. Ooh. Let me see if I can get the flare off.
Can you read the, because we can you read it for us?
Yes. So it's an image of this woman, happened to be me years ago. This is a print. This was a commercial for the United Way. The image says the average rapist gets about 3.5 years. Most victims get life. And this commercial, this is a still frame from it. They made into billboards. This commercial is still viewable on YouTube. You can watch the entire piece. And what you experienced was the psychological gesture that I used for that character. And I think you can probably see it in the image, hopefully. You can see that lingering. And question?
I'm just pointing something. It's interesting that you started from the top. Because when we were doing it, I was like, what am I doing now? Why am my hands why am I so open and exposed? And then now it makes more sense. I said, okay, I'm just gonna go with it because this is what you're suggesting. So I'm just gonna go with it. But it felt so vulnerable. I felt so vulnerable doing that, putting my hands up.
Thank you, Hadar. Yes, because and so one of the questions arises, which is, how do you come up with a gesture? How do you find a gesture? And so talk about that. I have 3 different ways, which I don't think we'll have time to go into fully today. But it's one is you are inspired with it. You read the copy, you read the script, and somehow the gesture is living in you and you know it. And this was for me that case. Other times one can go literally through the planet imagination, as Marjo-Riikka calls it. I call it the sphere. Through your ideal artistic center, you are able to ground yourself and then radiate into that sphere and in effect download the image from the character. You're able to contact the script, contact the story as living beings. Mr. Chekhov said all these beings exist in this sphere of imagination that envelops the entire planet. And we can download it and we can communicate with it either kinesthetically or visually or audio. And then we can, in effect, put it on like an imaginary body. We can have it show us the psychological gesture, and then we try it on. And if that doesn't work, then there's a way we can step through a series of questions through the intellect. So inspiration, imagination, and intellect are 3 pathways to finding it. When we look at the question of psychological gesture, one that frequently comes up is, how many are there? And they are correlated to, very often, correlated to objective and reaction to objective. And so one could say anywhere there's an objective or aim or purpose, there could be a gesture. So like the Stanislavski system that has super objectives, objectives of a unit, of an act, of a scene, of a moment, a beat, there could be that many psychological gestures. If we can find the overall psychological gesture, this is what I call a super PG, then that super PG should work for every part of the entire script. So that's an exciting thing.
How do you find it? Through what you've just suggested, or do you?
Yes. So either it appears for you just through inspiration, you work actively with the active waiting gaze of inviting the character, and you dialogue, and or you step through this intellect process. So I have a very detailed intellectual process, and we just kind of touched on it a little bit with Tinkerbell. But before we do that, I want to talk about the concept of archetypal gesture and psychological gesture and some of the essential distinctions between that. The archetype, the word archetype, comes from the Greek, and it has to do with the concept of the form, the original mold, the shape, original shape. And we could say that I'm referring a little bit to what one of Chekhov's mentees, Jack Colvin, shared with me a perspective on this. So this comes from Jack Colvin. The archetype is almost like the idea realm. So I get an idea, and it's invisible, intangible. It's from that sphere. And it's the model. It's the ideal form of something. And when I try to create an actual model, it becomes a prototype. The archetype to a prototype. And if I duplicate the prototype, it becomes a stereotype. I make a bunch of stereotypes there. What we're looking to do is find prototypes. So that each psychological gesture comes from this realm, and we create a specific form for this one character. And Mr. Chekhov says, when you find it, it will last your whole life. You'll know it, you'll never forget it, and it will trigger you every single time. And I can say that gesture clearly does affect me in that way. And I have other gestures that I've used as an actress over the years that also can trigger exactly what they did back, 30 years ago, 40 years ago when I worked with them. So we look at the archetype, and in Chekhov world, there's a set of movement patterns called archetypal gestures. And they, for me, in my training form, they're a training process only. And they are the most basic movements. So I'd love for us to get up and do some. And I'm just going to go through 6, the most basic 6. Now, I want to be very clear that I'm also a scholar on Michael Chekhov's work. And I can say there are 3 different sources that have lists of gestures, and none of them are the same. So you will never be able to find the one and only definitive list of what archetypal gestures are. So it's really exciting for me to help you understand why I think these basic 6 are most interesting, and to understand this concept. If you are a person who has your own personality, pretty much most of us, there are things that you just don't do. They're not in your wheelhouse, so to speak. I would never do that. I would never do that. I would never do that. But your character might do that. And if you have your own judgment or criticism on that, for example, if I had a guy who I was trying to teach him to smash, and he would not smash me because he liked me, and you're my teacher, and I don't want to smash you. I don't want to be that mean and cruel to you. And I told him that he could not learn, I would not teach him anything else, and I would not be his teacher if he didn't smash me right then, because he looked like Mr. Clean. He was a big guy, muscle-bound, big guy, right? And he was very soft and sweetly spoken. So what do you think was going to happen to his career if he couldn't smash, right? And so he did. He smashed me, and he got to where he could smash really well. And that was our last class, only because he booked 6 national commercials, 6 movies of the week, and became a recurring bodyguard on a soap opera, all through smash. So one of the reasons to do archetypal gestures is to restore to your body these these archetypal patterns that you might not be naturally comfortable with. Okay, be able to turn them on and turn them off. So let's come on up and let's try. I'm gonna do 2 of each. And I want to reiterate some of the things we've already spoken about, which is how much of your body is an actor's body? All of it. Yes. And so you want to make sure that the legs, where the will force really lives, are very engaged, and the heel of the hands. Okay. So those are real central things. And okay. We're going to start with push. Again, do your own version of push, or you can model mine. And we're going to take a nice inhale. With that, inhaling a big, strong inhale. Gather all the forces of the universe and exhale and push. Push with your belly, your knee, your heel of your hands, your eyes, your breath, 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 breath. Sustain, 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 and release. Good. Let's keep a steady exhale all the way through that sustaining. If you don't put enough effort into it, it won't awaken the urge. So a strong effort, 100% effort, activates the will force in you. Right now, there's no reason to push. It's archetypal, and archetypal is pure will, with no thought for why, and no quality, but a neutral quality. So we don't love this push, and we don't hate this push. One more push. Ready? Inhaling all the forces of the universe with an energy field bigger than your body. Energy force, radiant, radiant, radiant. Exhale. Keep those arms, legs, body pushing forward, and release. Great. And now let's do a pull. Imagine, so we're going to the opposite end. We're going through the polarity. I'm moving forward into the space to gather the forces, and I'm pulling with my whole being, exhaling. Sustaining, 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 and release. And I'm pulling with force. I'm actually using muscular tension, and I'm building my skill to be able to easily have that kind of power in my body. Okay? The more I break through my early phases of fear, perhaps around pulling, the more ease I can bring into it without losing my radiant power. And one more time. Great. Now we're going to do a lift. We're going to go all the way down to the ground. Inhale as we down. And lift. Up, 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 sustain, and release. And one more time, gather all the forces, that huge energy field, lifting, lifting, lifting. Exhale, exhale, exhale. Release. Now we're going to smash a good exhale, good inhale on this, and you use an open throat on the exhale. As you smash, don't hit the actual ground. Remember, safety for yourself and for the space. Inhale. Yes, good, guys. Inhale. Great, great. And now, gather. Good, good. Yeah, we're going to gather. I'm doing this a little sideways so you can see I'm reaching into the back space, gathering from the back space, and gather, 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 gather until it meets. You can do this many different ways. I'll do this again. Reaching into the back space. Inhale. Gather, 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 gather. And release. Good. And now throw. Okay, and one could, yeah, so let's do throw. We're going to do 3 throws. We're going to do a baseball-y kind of throw. Ready? that throw, sustain the hand extension. This time the throw is going to follow all the way through, but I'm going to keep looking at what I threw. And the next one is going to be 2 hands throwing overhead. Good, good. And come back for a moment. Good. So we looked at 6, 6 gestures, and they, for me, relate to 6 directions. They're about the urge to send energy from the center to the periphery in a push. The opposite or polarity to that, which is the pull, which is to bring energy from the periphery to the center. And then we did a smash, which was to take the energy and send it down there. And lift, which was to send the energy up. And then gather, which is to bring it from the entire periphery to the center. And throw, which is from this center out. I think you could also call this disperse. There's a good justification that one could say that really it's tear. An archetype is like a prime number in that it can't be reduced to less than that. So all of these 6 that we did are things that we are also, one could say, an archetype is something you know that you were never taught. So we see this in babies, don't we? We see them kicking, pushing from within the womb. And very quickly, we see them gathering and pulling. We see them reach, gather, pull. And we see them throw. And so these are all natural, and they're natural across all cultures. And they're actually natural in some of our mammal life as well. So these are things that we know, but some of us don't use all of them, or we use them only in one way. So we want to really understand that the distinction between the archetypal gesture and the psychological gesture is that the archetypal gesture is an exercising training process to help us learn. And we would go through, we would work just on push, for example, for 2 hours and work it into its subtle, veiled way, right? And we would maybe play around with different kinds of pushes by doing some more slowly, some more quickly. The moment we start changing the moderate, what I call universal rather than neutral, the moderate universal tempo, rhythm, and form of it, we slide it immediately into a psychological gesture. Because psychological, let's look at the word, like we looked at archetype, and now we look at psyche, and psyche is Greek for breath and soul. And I looked this up and took some pictures of it so I could literally quote you guys here. Psyche, soul, mind, spirit, life force, vital force. These are things about it, and it comes from the Greek psyche, breath, life, and soul. So today, most people, when they read Michael Chekhov's materials, they think of the term psychological as meaning what our contemporary world thinks of as psychological, which is a thinking process, a brain, how your brain operates. And what we always want to remember is that because Michael Chekhov first asks us to be in touch with the I am creative forces of the ideal artistic being through the higher ego, that we are also being trained in our Chekhov work to be working at a higher level than the average artist, that we are training to be able to create the very soul and breath of the character. And when we bring that creation to life, it inspires, inspiration, breath, right? Inspires our audiences and gives them new life. Through our act of transformation, through our sacrificing our lower ego, we bring new life to our audience. And the psychological gesture, therefore, connects to the very psychology of the human soul, which falls into three different areas. It falls into that thinking force, into the feeling forces, and into the will forces. So when we have an archetypal gesture and we start adding feeling force to it, we've transformed it from a pure archetype already into a psychological gesture. If we add a reason to push or pull or lift or smash, gather, throw, whatever it is, penetrate, reach, drag, tear, when we add a reason to do it, to get that rapist off me, right? And a quality of vulnerability, terror, fear, etc., we have added thinking force and we've added feeling force to the will force part of the gesture. So what the gesture is doing, right, is in this case, scraping this guy, throwing him and his residue and the horror that he's induced, getting it off and restoring my power there. And that, when I understand that's what this move means, it gets me to think like the character. And the quality, the strength with which I do it, and the strength, the amount of quality that I have, the strength of the fear with which I do it, or the vulnerability with which I do it, activates my feeling forces. And the amount of literal effort or power I put into it aligns my will forces. So again, the clarity that you have of the gesture transforms your thinking forces into the character's thinking forces. The amount, the intensity, you could say, with which you engage the quality, to the degree that you are intense with the expression of your quality, that's the degree that you'll be impacted and awakened emotionally. And the amount of effort you put into the act, that is the amount that your will align. So this, whenever you see Michael Chekhov's word psychology, he is thinking of forces, not just centers. And there's a whole video that I have on YouTube about thinking, feeling, willing, which really goes into detail about the distinction between using them as centers or forces and the expanded capabilities therefore. When you align your thinking, feeling, and willing forces with the characters, then you will be inspired by that. And it's exciting to know that if you, from there, work with, and this is part of the intellectual process, work with identifying the character's successes and creating a psychological gesture for their win, and create a psychological gesture for their complete loss. So you wind up with what Chekhov calls compositionary gestures. It's a sequence of gestures. The law of triplicity, things in three, you wind up with 3 gestures. So you wind up with a gesture that is the main gesture. For example, it's this. And I have a victory gesture, which may for this character, my gesture may be coming strongly down like this, where I am willing to stand forward and move forward in society, open and powerful, and no longer at that level of vulnerability and no longer contained by fear. If you do watch that video on YouTube, you'll see the final frame where that gesture is there. And then the lost gesture would be taking that, coming all the way back to the, you get the idea. So any given part of the story, the arc of the character will be somewhere between their worst nightmare moment and their greatest victory moment. And the heart of the gesture is what you live, that core gesture is what gets you there and back. So you can create one grand gesture out of these three gestures by sort of merging them and mixing them. So I want to just show you one more thing, and then we'll open it up for a little talk. So I just want to show you this. There are 5 guidelines to creating a great gesture, and these really come from Jack Colvin. One is it's always a full breath, a full inhale and an exhale. You inhale on the inspiration and you exhale the expression. You want to use your full body when you're designing it and activating it for you want to go from one extreme to the other. So you notice we went into the backspace before we gathered, as an example. You want to use full strength. For example, when we looked at Elise, we could feel every part of Elise was tenderly stepping toward speaking to that little bird, right? We could feel every part, 100% of tenderness, right? So it doesn't have to look rough or anything like that, but she was radiating throughout her whole being with that tenderness. And then everything needs to be prepared. Your strong preparation makes the action effortless. So you need to prepare, to act, to sustain, and then to stop. We call it pass the energy. To prepare for, that's on your inhale, the action on your exhale, and sustaining on your exhale, and then you must release and free and clear yourself, okay? Unless you're planning on sustaining it. So as a practicing process, you definitely want to know your specific stop point, that specificity. To review, we can say a formula for archetypal gesture is that it's pure will, and psychological gesture often has an archetype at its core, plus feeling, plus thinking, which is the balance, the trinity of psychology: thinking, feeling, willing. And to be clear, one error that happens often, because Michael Chekhov could only show pictures and not videos, is some people think of these as almost something like Amy Cuddy's power poses. And the difference between a pose is it's stationary. And the power of the gesture is in the movement. So gesture, by definition, is a movement plus an intention. So without the intention, if I just go like this, it's not a gesture. If I intend to expand or I intend to contract, now I have gesture, because there's intent. Expanding and contracting are the grandparent of all gesture. It's why it's often begun with, because everything's in motion, and all motion is either expanding or contracting. Your lungs, your cells, the nature, the planet, the universe, everything is expanding and contracting. So that's why it becomes the first grand archetypal gesture. All push, pull, lift, smash, gather, throw, tear, drag, penetrate, reach, twist, ring, whatever it is, are all variations of contracting and expanding. Okay. So let's open it up for questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you repeat the last thing on the board? The frame wasn't on all those, the equation of feeling plus. Could you just repeat that part?
Yes, yes. So an archetypal gesture is pure will. And I abbreviate that AG equals will. And a psychological gesture is will plus thinking plus feeling, or will plus an AG plus thinking and feeling. every gesture that every psychological gesture that I've ever created, I didn't necessarily start with an archetypal gesture because somehow it came to me. But when I look back at it, I could say, oh, well, at its core, it's a lift. At its core, it's a push. This one is a smash down, right? Or a push. You can call it, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to be worrying about names when you just have the image and the movement, and it takes care of everything for you.
Thank you.
Hey, I would like to ask about archetypal gesture. So you have the quality of movement. It's a bit of forceful, or is it what's the quality of movement in the?
Yes, for me it is, and the amount of force needed is the amount, the maximum resistance you can create in your imagination that allows you to easily complete the gesture without running out of breath. So I'll give you an example. If I'm doing push and I'm going, I've made it too hard for myself. I should only make it as hard as I can and still get to my furthest extension without going into a loss of balance, because losing balance is a different tool. I stay within my balance point where I can still keep pushing, and I imagine I'm pushing in my imagination still. My body is larger than my physical body, and it keeps pushing for 3 counts. And then I stop. That's my sustaining. That builds your skill set for radiation. And if I run out of breath before my 3rd count of my sustaining, I made it too hard. But if I make it too easy, as my default process, I probably haven't actually physically tried to push in my lower body. That's usually where it leaves first. Disengaging our lower body, biggest actor problem that I see, especially in film acting, where people satisfy themselves with acting up here. And so they wind up overacting because this isn't acting. And what they need to do is really, Mr. Chekhov said we need more energy in a close-up than we do in a farce on stage. And so where we need the energy is down in our thighs, down in the arches of our feet, down in our groin. So that and you can try this right now, if you try to push with your feet and do nothing but smile at the screen, you'll see something, right? No matter how still you try to, or how emotionless you try to keep your face, if you change from pushing into the ground into lifting into the ground, there's going to be a shift in your being. It's just going to happen. And so if you keep that, when you start to veil these gestures, always be aware that your lower body should be the last place where any actual tension fades there. So some people get very dancey in the name of the feeling of ease, but it's completely impractical. And again, I'm sharing information that comes from his direct students, that they actually have a certain amount of actual tension. They would always put me literally pushing another person to actually feel that force, because if you push against a wall, you can push against a wall and you'll feel, if you push against the wall, you'll feel that down here. And if you push with the heel of your hands, or push with the heel of your hands here, you'll feel this down here. But if you push just with the fingertips, you'll feel a very different thing, right? You feel a very different thing, because there are correlations. And what we're looking to do is understand how the whole energy system works as a whole, and find a way to easily be fierce, forceful, or easily be tender. The ferocity of tenderness that a parent has for a child, right? If the parent has to yank that child out of the street, that they're doing it with love, but it is a vicious and aggressive love, right? So we need to be able to slide into those kinds of power forces. And again, in the beginning, you work with maybe even more tension than you need, just to sort of break the cobwebs out of your own personal resistance. I had an actress who was so dynamic and so independent, and she was, when I had my studio in LA, she was in grad school, she was working professional actress, and she was in my class, and she had 2 jobs to support herself. And when it came to teaching her how to pull, she kept falling over, and she was an athlete. She kept literally falling over and losing her balance, and she was so upset with herself because she could push like crazy. And I said, your home play for this week is just to practice pulling. And she came back the next week and she said, do you know people will help you if you ask them? And the thing was, she had never pulled for help because she was so independent, so forceful, and so dynamic. It never occurred to her that she could ask for help. And I could look at her biography and say, yeah, she grew up in poverty. And she probably didn't have role models who could help her. And so she gained this stunning, beautiful, powerful independence. But she was exhausting herself. And through just exercising this is leading us back to where Marjo-Riikka began with, we are human beings. And one of the great blessings of Michael Chekhov's work is that his goal was to help us become healthier, happier human beings. And then, as a healthy, happy human being, we will express our art truly creatively. We can create our own gestures for overcoming all of our frustration and stress about, isolation, or about what's happening to your finances. Or you can really, oh my God, my whole world's going to collapse. It's going to collapse. It's going to collapse. How am I going to? I'm going to rise out of this with love and self-compassion. I'm in my loss gesture. But I can lift this fear, rage, pain, and bring it with force, and fill myself with that compassion. And I can repeat that several times.
Lisa, I love you. This is so wonderful. It has been over an hour. I'm just careful about the time a little bit because it's late in Europe and there's so many questions for you. Would you like me to read some of them? I didn't want you to have to worry about the chat.
Yes, thank you.
And because we have to stop on the time for the students, it's midnight in Europe. So thank you. That was amazing. But let me find some. There was, I wrote a lot in chat. I was with you listening the whole time, and then the end I started a little bit answering. But there was a question from Puendra. I don't know, is he still here? Because it's like, I guess in India, it's probably 3 o'clock in the morning. He might have been gone. So maybe, can people just unmute and ask? Would that be the easiest? So I don't have to go all the way back in the chat, everything. There's a lot of...
I can ask my question before going from here in Finland. So I wrote that you said that inhale inspiration and exhale expression. And I'm just wondering and would like to hear your thoughts on whether inspiration can be expressive and vice versa. Like, what's your thought on that? Is it like in the stone, black and white?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, that's great. And yes, the actual gesture for that is that the inspiration streams in and expression streams out. But because we have this wonderful gift called radiating and receiving, it's always a two-way stream. So we can actually express. We can get inspiration coming in either direction, and we can get expression. We can receive expression. and we can radiate our inhaling. So we can, the impression. So I think, yes, one of the big answers for a lot of questions is it this or is it that? It's always great to ask yourself, if it is this, let me play with that. And what if it's this? And let me play with that, because there's so few rules about this thing. Those 5 guidelines, we call it beep, those 5 guidelines. Well, I've seen people do a gesture that didn't meet the guidelines at all, but it did its job just brilliantly. So don't hold on to guidelines too tightly. Just turn to them when something's not working.
Exactly.
Great, thank you.
Lisa, I'm so grateful. It's been wonderful to actually just sit back and enjoy for me as well. And I know you have so much more to offer and give, and people can probably contact you through your website, correct? If they have more questions, and you have a lot of videos. Lisa has tons of videos online already, and you have her information. The website is there. And I can also try to look into sending the chat. It is time, we have 3 minutes left. So I want to thank everybody, especially thank Lisa and Alice and everybody to taking part of this. And feel free to contact me. If you cannot find Lisa's contact information, you can contact me, and then I can give it to you if you cannot find her. Lisa, do you want to say anything, not to go into teaching anymore because I'm taking care of time, but do you want to say something? I want to give you a chance.
Oh, it was amazing just seeing the movement and just hearing some of your work. And I just am so grateful, and thank you for allowing me to offer something. And I hope that you find it inspiring.
Absolutely amazing.